You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 350 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer, and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin, and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
Happy Father's Day, Jeremy.
Likewise, same to you and to your father as well. He's been on a Father's Day episode here of the podcast in the past, and always good to wish my uncle a Happy Father's Day as well. Before we get into it, I want to make sure we bring on our guest right away because we need to talk about all the stuff that's happened this week. To help us do that, you know him from his work at NBC Chicago and his many appearances on this podcast. Longtime friend of the show, James Neveau, is back. James, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us today.
I frankly am astonished that Pat actually still has his shirt on. I thought he'd still be whooping it up after Birmingham won the UFL title today. Congratulations to the Stalls, as Mr. Nagel calls them.
Thank you very much.
We could talk about the UFL. We could talk about the Cubs. I figured instead we'd just talk about Riot Fest moving to SeatGeek Stadium instead of Douglas Park. That was my big news of the week. Was following the Riot Fest lineups and the big move. Closer to me, but geographically. But man, I've never been to a festival at SeatGeek Stadium, but I can only imagine. I don't know what that setup's going to be like with multiple stages.
Certainly don't. I have never been to a festival there either. I guess the closest I've been to was the Major League Rugby had their championship match at SeatGeek last year. They had Shaquille O'Neal, i.e. DJ Diesel, performing before the game, and then Dropkick Murphys after the game. So
I would have come.
It would actually, you know what? It was worth the price of admission, and frankly,
shipping up to Boston.
It was an excellent game, actually. So that's the only festival type thing I've ever been to at SeatGeek Stadium. But yeah, I guess we all eventually grow old and move out to the suburbs, and that's pretty much what Riot Fest ended up doing.
I was literally texting Pat that if they were looking for another venue, I would have loved to have seen them take advantage of the White Sox park and play there, as they were out of town that weekend, and they have plenty of parking lots as well. And you could have set up something inside outside, so you could have had a festival set up with multiple stages around there. I think that that was a prime location that was unused that weekend, but. We'll see. Anyway, enough stalling. I guess we'll get into talking about the Cubs. We've got to do it. Pat, why don't you lead us off?
Sure. So I had dinner with my dad today for Father's Day, and I was tormenting him with some trivia questions. I was having so much fun, I thought I would do the same to you.
Excellent.
I think this will tell us everything you need to know about where the Cubs are as of June 16th, 2024. Trivia question number 1. Which player who the Cubs traded in the weeks prior, that July period prior to the end of the 2021 trade deadline, when the entire core was dispatched? Which player did they trade who, if he were a Cub today, would have not only the highest OPS, but by far the highest WAR of any position player, and would be heads and tails above everyone in offensive and defensive prowess?
Gotta think about this, man. I'm trying to think of who Jock Peterson?
That is correct.
Wow, nice job.
Who, as you may recall, I believe was traded over the All-Star break weekend, first player traded, when the Cubs were a mere 3 games out of first place, right? Here we are, 8 games out.
8 games out.
Question number 2, and Jeremy, I think I already mention this to you, so let's give James first chance at this.
Okay.
The WAR leaders for the Cubs this year are obviously
You
Mike
say obvious.
Iniesta, number one. Number two is Javier Assad, and number three is Michael Bush. Can you name the player who's fourth on the team in WAR?
Player who is fourth on the Cubs in WAR right now. I am going to go. I think I'm going to go Mike Tachman.
No, you're wrong.
Oh,
Jeremy.
As we discussed earlier today, Hayden Wesneski.
oh my God. Oh,
There you go.
Unbelievable. That if
That's
you want to know
insane.
where the Cubs are currently.
insane.
If you want to know where the Cubs are, Jeremy, I've got yet the third and final question. This is the old nail in the coffin question if you want to know where the Cubs are. All right. The third question is, can you name the Cub who has the same cumulative WAR this season as all Cubs catchers, first baseman, second baseman, shortstops, and third baseman combined?
You said, Nate, this is a Cubs player?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I almost said something sarcastic, and that would have been inaccurate. I almost was like, how's Nick Castellanos doing right about now? Can you run by the positions one more time, Pat? I'm sorry.
This Cub player has the same WAR cumulatively this season as all Cubs players at the following positions: catcher, first base, second base, shortstop, and third base combined. The combined WAR of everyone who's played those positions this year is the same as this other player.
I'm going to say, I am going to go sarcastic, I think. I'm going to go Pete Crow Armstrong.
Close.
Wow. Okay.
Jeremy?
Is it a position player?
It is not.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Is it Shota Imanaga, or is he too much WAR for all those combined
much
positions?
WAR.
Wow.
I was gonna say Drew Smiley, by the way, for the record.
Well, that would have been humorous, but not as humorous. The correct answer is Tyson Miller.
Stop it. What is the total combined WAR of all of those position players you just mentioned?
0.7.
Plus 0.3 or something.
0.7.
Almost a player.
The same as Tyson Miller.
Wow.
God.
Now, in fairness, some of those players, like, for example, Michael Bush, are above that number, but don't forget, you've got your Miles Mastrobonis and your Jan Gomeses and your Nick
Got some
Madrigals.
negatives pulling you down.
Wisdoms and your Bodies and your Morels. And when you add it all up, when you put them all together, Horner, Swanson. Yeah. So, this is where we are. What place do you think we're in? Don't ask.
As of the time of this recording, the Cubs are 34-38, having just lost 2 of 3 to the St. Louis Cardinals at home. The only one they didn't lose, of course, Shota Imanaga's game.
Yep.
The other 2 they lost, you definitely can't blame Jameson Taillon for the Sunday loss. That not on him. That we're back to the story of the offense again. We're
not on him, nor on the bullpen.
Nor on the bullpen. Exactly.
The Cardinals scored 6 runs in 3 days, and they won 2 games.
With the wind blowing all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. 5 hits.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of grief this week for predicting the Cubs would go 3-3, and people thought that I was being overly pessimistic. What was the final? You want to run up the numbers on that one, Jeremy? I think I was optimistic, as it turns out.
It was not good. It was not a good week, to say the least. I have I have to re-pull up the schedule. Sorry, I did not have the schedule up. But a 2-4 week as we head into I'm pulling up because I know we got the Giants for the next 10 games or whatever.
Got the Giants, the Mets, and the Giants. I believe is how
Giants. Yes. So 2-4, I believe. Yeah, we were all 3-3 last week, and really overly optimistic because this was worst case scenario. 2-4 by far.
The Cubs are now in sole possession of last place. They have more losses than all but two teams in the National League.
Yep.
That being the Colorado Rockies and the New York Mets.
Definitely.
The Miami Marlins. The Mets have fewer losses than the Cubs. My bad.
Yep.
The Miami Marlins, who I think took 2 out of 3 from us, right?
Have they?
Yeah.
I don't even remember.
Did we play Miami already?
Yeah, we played them very early. No, the Cubs won 2 out of 3 in one of the games. They split
2 and 2.
They had a doubleheader. Yeah.
That was it. The doubleheatter. Yep. Okay.
They split the doubleheader. Yeah. Okay.
So maybe when the Cubs started off the season sweeping the Rockies, maybe we should have been quite as overly optimistic at the time, because from my sign, apart from sweeping the Astros, oddly enough, the Cubs haven't swept anybody since, have they? In fact,
they haven't won a 3-game series in a month.
Right. In fact, the Cubs haven't won 3 in a row since April. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The best they could do was 2 dramatic
against the White
behind
Sox.
wins against the White Sox back to back.
Dramatic come from behind wins. We got a long YouTube comment expressing the same frustrations about having to come from behind against a terrible White Sox, a historically bad White Sox team, and how that should have been a telling sign. Yeah.
And yet, in the last 5 weeks, the Cubs haven't won 2 games back to back, period, other than those 2.
Right.
Yeah, the losing 2 of 3 in Tampa. And everything was just a struggle there. Is Tampa Bay the least fun team to watch? Holy cow! Those games were a slog to sit through.
Yeah.
Like, how are people fans of that team? That team is hideously uninteresting, and the Cubs are bad. So that was a tough series. And then the 2 of 3 against the Cardinals was hard to watch, especially when you're going to make me sit through Chip Carey and Jim Deshaies on the broadcast. I had to sit through a Chip Carey game on Sunday.
I sat through a Pat Hughes game. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's the proper way to do it.
I was so disgusted. I watched. I was doing other things, and I had my ESPN Gamecast on the entire time.
I was watching U.S. Open golf and listening to the Cubs, so that was how I ended up spending my Sunday afternoon. I did watch a little bit of the Sky game too.
The old rule of thumb is if you only score 14 runs in a 6-game week, odds are you're probably not going to fare too well. The fact that they were able to go 2-4 is probably fortuitous and a sign that of great things to come. But boy, they got to score more than two. They got to score more than like 2.2 runs a game.
Yes, but if I told you the Cardinals would score 6 runs in the entire series, you'd take that, right?
It felt great.
Yeah, wildly disappointing.
So do the Cubs.
So where do we go from here? So like we mentioned, the homestand will continue 3 against the Giants, 3 against the Mets, and then on the road 4 against the Giants, and then closing out the month against the Brewers in Milwaukee. What do the Cubs do here? Are they do they judge where they are this season after the San Francisco games? Because while the division may be out of reach, your wild card hopes, because there's so many bad teams, are still in play.
I mean, I think you can look at it from the perspective that almost all the teams in the National League are bad.
Correct.
Cubs included. They just currently happen to be the worst of this group of about 10 teams, none of whom are really very good. The Giants are one of them. They're 2 games under 500. And we keep saying, the Cubs are right there. If they get hot, and this is all true. If they get hot, they can jump many of these teams very quickly. Now, the division is quickly becoming,
not an option.
Not an option. No. And the way the wild cards games are set up, for better or for worse, you make it into the wild card rounds, and it's just a crapshoot, with all these short series. But the problem I think that we face, from what I can tell, is that when the glass is half full, we can say we're just a couple hot weeks away from catching everybody. Yeah. The downside is these bad teams that we're playing. You lost 2 out of 3 to the Cardinals. You got 3 out of 4 to Cincinnati. They're in that group. Then you lost 2 out of 3 to Cincinnati before that. Obviously, you lost 2 out of 3 to the Brewers. You lost 2 straight to the Cardinals. Pittsburgh, you split, you lost 3 out of 4 to them. You split the 4-game series with them before that. You lost 2 out of 3 to the Padres. When you keep going, you end up at the point where it's like, look, all these teams in the division who were just as bad as we think, although technically a little bit worse in, when we actually do play them, they do better than we do, right? So, the Cubs, yes. So on the one hand, you're right. The Cubs are going to play the Giants. This is a golden opportunity to take a team that's just like a game or 2 ahead of you. And if you do well, we've got 3 at home, and then we've got 4 on the road. So 7 of the next 10 games are against an under 500 Giants team. If you make hay, even if you go 5-2, you figure, you catapult yourself above them. You're probably ahead of the Cardinals by then and a couple other teams, but you're still in this swamp of teams all fighting for like the last 2 playoff spots. There's like 10 teams battling for it seems like. And my greatest fear is that they don't go 5-2. They might go 4-3 or even 3-4 or worse. And then you're just in the same place you are now. Like, you're no better off. And
right.
And as the season keeps progressing, and now you're like, well, okay, so that wasn't great, but now it's the end of June, and then it becomes the All-Star break, and then a couple more weeks, it's a trade deadline. And so it's got to start sometime. And we've been saying this for a while now. And here we have a 10-game stretch again against teams that are imminently beatable, i.e. the Giants and the Mets. And then before you get to the Brewers, and then you play the Brewers and Phillies. So it would be nice before then in these 10 games. Let's really need to go 7-3, right? Or 8-2 in a stretch here. Would we take 6-4? Probably in this mess of a league, but 5-5 is not going to cut it. And anything below that, and you really are, I think, on the other side of the buy-sell metric.
Yeah, and we can talk extensively about the buy-sell thing because the Cubs are not in a position where they're going to be able to unload a bunch of assets. Who's going to want a guy like Ian Happ? Who's going to want Nico Horner? Who's going to want Seiya Suzuki? You don't really have a plethora of guys that you can dump as 1-year rental types and get something out of. Do you think a team's going to pony up for Cody Bellinger? No, probably not. The Cubs don't have the Scott Efrosses of the world this season. They don't have the Jock Petersons even.
I'm sorry, we've got Tyson Miller and Hayden Wisniewski.
Our war leaders are available.
I got to be honest with you guys. Like, who do you think is the highest profile Cub who's even worth anything on the market right now? I could make an argument. It might be Justin Steele. Am I insane saying that? Like, that's about the only guy that I think you could get a realistically good return for that somebody would actually want.
They might take Assad, depending on.
That's a fair one, yeah.
Next couple games.
Yeah. Well, and I think but if you're serious about competing next year, you're obviously not going to trade either of those guys. I think that this isn't a tear it down to the studs kind of thing. You literally can't right now because no one will take these pieces off your hands.
Would it be easier then to not try to win next year, to give Jed a little more breathing room?
I'm sorry. This is the wrong podcast. Sorry.
All right. That would be too harsh on Jed. Shouldn't we give him more time?
That is not this podcast.
This retool.
You know what? No, I'll go ahead and say the hot take right now. I think if the Cubs decide that this isn't working and they need to blow it up, they need to fire Jed Hoyer. They can't let him do it again. They just can't.
I always stay on the side of they will only fire Jed Hoyer if his performance metric for ownership is wins and losses.
No, it's
if his performance metric with ownership is how much money you're making ownership and how much you're valuing the franchise is continuing to add value while you're in charge, then he's doing a great job. And
they're $3 million under the luxury tax threshold
Exactly.
this year, and they're not even sniffing the playoffs. Like, they're spending a ton of money to not win.
Couldn't anybody do that though? You don't need Jed for that.
you don't need Jed for that. So yeah, that's so do you wait and is it a PR move at some point, and then I'm not totally convinced that the Ricketts care about actually winning if it's not impacting the bottom line at this point.
Let's put it this way: if the Cubs don't make the playoffs this year, they will have gone through a 4-year stretch of retooling, which is the same length of the complete teardown rebuild of 2011, 12, 13, and 14.
Yep.
And yet, will we be on the precipice of 2015 next year? I mean, that's the thing. Like, are we at that point? And I think one of the frustrations a lot of people have is, okay, we've talked about this extensively about how the Cubs have some veterans signed for the next couple of years who are blocking positions. You hear often the refrain from anyone who's trying to justify happiness right now says, well, we've got the best farm system. The Cubs and the Orioles, right, have these great farm systems. Their farm system actually, I would say, is much greater because I see their players come up like Rodriguez and Rushman and Henderson, and they're really, really good. They remind me a lot of the Cubs that came up in 2015. Bryant's and Baez's and the Russells and remember that group? I mean, those guys were really good, like all-star good. What the Cubs are bringing up are a bunch of guys, when they do bring them up, who show flashes of success, like Christopher Morel, who, shucks, is hitting into bad luck, but that bad luck is translating into a sub 200 batting average, right? Like there's bad luck and there's bad luck. You can't play defense either, FYI.
Not at all.
And then you've got somebody like the jewel of your entire farm system, the absolute jewel that we've been hearing about forever. The reason for the rebuild, the reason for the trading the core is Pete Armstrong. And, is it still early? Sure. But right now, his role is as a defensive pinch hitter. Plays defense and pinch runner. Pinch runner. So he pinch runs and he plays defense in center field. Well, Bill North did that for the Cubs in the 1970s. I mean, that's not in the A's and whatnot. That's not the jewel of your farm system. Like when I think of the jewel of a farm system, I think of bringing up Austin Riley or somebody. You're bringing up with the Braves, bring up a guy who becomes who's a well-rounded all-star player. Like that can't be the best you're going to do, right? That can't be the high impact guy. And again, he's still young, but it'd be nice to have him hit at some point, right? At least average, be an average hitter, be an average offensive player.
An average offensive, but for a guy who was touted as a 5-tool player, by the way.
Yeah. So anyway, I just, I think we have to muddle through the next couple of weeks and see where we're at. But I do start to look at, the future and like we've talked about, it is quite, you hear people say the Cubs need to make some trades to get better now, and they need to trade.
You can't.
Some of the players who are, but the Cubs need to trade some of the younger farm players who are blocked from coming up, and then turn those trades into controllable major league players, right?
There you go. There, you've nailed it exactly on the head by saying controllable major league players. You're not trading a DJ Hers for a Jamer Candelario this year.
Right. And DJ Hurts, by the way, 13 strikeouts the other day for the Nationals. That was nice of him. Candelario, by the way, would be the best hitter on the Cubs if he were still here.
Yeah,
just
sure would be.
Yep.
So what did the Cubs do? They traded a pitcher who granted it was against the Marlins, but he had a fantastic outing. A guy who's got the stuff, right, to be a good starter. Because of course the Cubs didn't need him because we have so many good starters, right? As it turns out, injuries are a thing. And they traded him for a guy who was going to play third base and then got injured, but that they gave up on that guy, and he's now making $13 million a year for the next 3 years, being an impact bat on a team. So the Cubs got nothing for him. So you're right. It is frustrating because it seems like they don't quite they haven't quite figured out what they're doing here.
Well, I mean,
or they're undervaluing the players they trade and overvaluing the rentals they get. I don't know. There's got to be something's got to give, right? At some point.
Well, I mean, not only did they trade guys like DJ Hers, who were, having incredible runs with other teams, or incredible performances, I should say, they've also just kind of cast off guys like Jason Adam and Trevor McGill and, Jeremiah Estrada. Like, they've also given up on those guys who have become really useful weapons that, boy, howdy, would make this bullpen really, really good if they still had them. And it wasn't like they had to get rid of them because of, price constraints or whatever it was. They just were like, man, these guys aren't worth that much. And now they're really integral pieces of contending bullpens in Milwaukee and Tampa and San Diego.
Yeah, and it's tricky because every team gives up on a guy too soon and, makes a mistake. But given the players and the pitchers who the Cubs kept and the ones who they thought, the Jose Cuases of the world, former Cub now, but who they thought were worthy of 40-man roster spots. And you look at the guys they gave up on, they just guessed wrong a lot, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah.
And, at some point, fairly or unfairly, when you do that, and when you don't have a deep enough team to make up for it with other players, you pay the price, right? If you're a general manager.
You can throw Jose Cuas being designated for assignment onto the pile of Jed trades that didn't work out for sure. That is one. You can look at the Nico Hoerner deal. We were talking about this earlier. Nico Hoerner, he had a very disappointing at bat in the 9th inning today against St. Louis. He's 28 for 138 since April 26th, a 203 average there. That's this is awful. I mentioned to you in our text, Pat, we're getting into Darwin Barney territory for Nico Hoerner.
So what you're telling me is that playing with a broken bone in your throwing hand isn't a good idea. This is insane news to me. I can't even come to grips with it.
That's what the Cubs will like to do is keep a player who's hurt and ineffective instead of actually adding someone to their bench who could be, or we could find out more about. We talked about this last week, and they're not calling up Vasquez to fill a spot that was needed there, and continuing to ask players to play through things. As I watch Chris Bryant deteriorate out in Colorado, it always disappoints me thinking that, the Cubs made him play through a lot of injuries and broke his body.
Apparently.
Yeah, Hoerner's a tough case because his defense has deteriorated this year too.
Surprising. That's a huge point you're making there. The Swanson Hoerner infield.
He never hit for a lot of power and didn't hit for power period, but he didn't walk a ton either. So Hoerner's trait was always kind of getting a higher batting average was the way he managed to do things. And earlier this year, I was happily surprised by the number of doubles he was getting. I think he led the team in doubles for a long time. But even the extra bases have kind of gone away with the injury. I don't know if it's due to the injury or not, but it feels like something's going on there. And he was also overtaken this week in the team lead in stolen bases by Pico Armstrong. Just pinch runs and steals bases. That's his main function right now. It's been a rough season for Hoerner. And like you said, the Cubs' stubborn refusal to put a guy in the 10-day IL and bring somebody like a Luis Vasquez, a young guy, up, I think is really short-sighted on a lot of fronts. Not only do they have no idea what Vasquez can do in the majors because he's never had the chance to do it, but you really put a lot of pressure. You play short for 6, 7, 8 days on the bench, and then you bring Hoerner back probably a little bit too soon because he feels bad about having a short bench, I'm guessing, and here we go. And it's not the first time they've done that. In fact, it's probably about the 18th time they've done that, and it's not just under Craig Counsell. It happened under David Ross. It's almost like a team decision thing. Vis-a-vis a manager thing.
Mm-hmm. I made a comment about this the other day, and I would love your guys' thoughts on this. If this team was playing like this with the bad offense and the just incredibly silly defensive miscues that they've been making consistently that have cost them a lot of games, if they did this under David Ross, you imagine the furor about the manager. It seems to me like people are kind of losing sight of the fact that maybe it wasn't the manager that was the big issue here. Like it strikes me how no one's talking about Craig Counsell, oh, he's not doing a great job. It's like, no, he has a really terrible roster. And then you're like, maybe David Ross wasn't quite as oafish as everybody kind of thought he was.
I think that David Ross did have a bad roster for much of his managerial career. I do think he was more oafish, though, than Craig Counsell, despite that. And I didn't mind the move at the time, and I still don't today. But I think it does sort of lend itself to the reaches that a manager can have on a team. Given, what can a manager do to help win games? Well, control the clubhouse, how they manage the players, how do they keep them level and not too up and too down. Cubs haven't had to worry about getting up too high. It's just the downs. But also like how you manage a bullpen and how you rest players and do things like that. Cubs' problems have been harder to manage, right? Like your reliable defensive players have played poorly on defense. What do you do about that? No one is hitting. I mean, everybody all teams go through those team slumps every once in a while. But not all teams go through them to the extent the Cubs have for such an extended period of time. You see managers who will bring in, no matter what reliever they bring in, the guy seems to get rocked. Like there'll always be like a week or two of a season where it feels like you can't do anything right on the, do you take the starter out? Do you bring a reliever in? Any decision you make seems like the wrong one. But it's exacerbated when you don't score runs. And I think we've seen that this year with the Cubs where, I think Saturday's game was a perfect example. If you have a 4-run lead, you don't have to worry about getting your setup man and your closer to pitch the 8th and 9th. You can bring in Tyson Miller, one of the best WAR players on the team, and let him pitch 2 innings, out of the bullpen, and that's fine, and it's a lot less pressure that way. But 99% of the time, the Cubs have played under intense pressure. The starters probably feel it. The bullpen, I'm sure, feels it because they're playing in close games, and any mistake they make seems to come back to haunt them because of the lack of hitting. I think it all gets down to the hitting.
I actually the more we talk about this, the more I'm just like convinced that there are I honestly am not really seeing a path forward. Like, and I hate that feeling because normally you can kind of see like, okay, like they've got this prospect who will eventually slot in at this position. This prospect will do this. They can sign this particular free agent. They just seem to be kind of stuck in like, I almost think they're like the Chicago Bulls right now where they, have the ability to continue spinning their wheels, but they don't have the ability to get out of the mud. That's the vibe that I keep getting about the Chicago Cubs right now. And I think that they have really useful players. Like I think that, Ben Brown has shown, I think, really nice flashes so far. I've really liked what Javier Assad has brought. I think Shota Imanaga was a phenomenal signing, but those are all, your starting pitchers. You're just literally getting nothing out of guys that you're paying big bucks to perform. Your Dansby Swanson, who, by the way, has a significantly lower WAR, I think, than Paul DeJong of the White Sox does, right? And I think that was a really widely panned signing, and look how that's working out for everybody.
Meanwhile,
somebody compared
ago.
him to Navy Perez, by the way, which really depressed me.
It wasn't long ago when people were singing the praises of the Dansby Swanson signing and saying that was the greatest. So isn't Jed so smart because he passed up on Trey Turner and Carlos Carrera and these other guys and Lindor and got Swanson at a discount, and Swanson's great. Again, these are long-term deals, so we'll find out. But
when you throw
Swanson hasn't hit in a year.
When you throw the Corey Seager from the year before into that, then they signed
Marcus Semien. Don't forget Marcus Semien.
And Marcus Semien. Yeah. So then you signed the 6th best shortstop available, and he's performing from that 2-year free agency period. You signed the 6th best free agent shortstop available,
and gave him like $170 million, lest we forget.
But at least you didn't overpay for a guy like Corey Seager or Marcus Simeon. Those guys.
God forbid overpay for a guy who was World Series MVP. Boy, I hate doing that.
Would hate to be under that contract.
Like I said, to me, like there are definitely pieces in place, and I agree with what Pat's saying about like the top end talent not really being there in the minor leagues. But I do think that players eventually are going to see a guy like an Owen Casey or a Matt Shaw really like mature into a really solid role. Everything I've read about Matt Shaw this season is that they actually think he might be good enough defensively to play third base. I know that was a big point of concern for some folks. They knew the bat would play, but they were curious about the defense. Owen Casey has adjusted beautifully to AAA pitching. I think that he's eventually going to be a dynamic power threat for somebody. It just at a certain point, you still have blockages there, especially in the case of a guy like Owen Casey. You're not going to bench Ian Happ or Seiya Suzuki for him right now. It's just not going to happen. And you're not calling him up if he's only going to be getting sporadic at bats either. You cannot September 2023 Alex Canario, that guy. He has to be consistently in the lineup if you're going to have him at the major league level. And so I see all of these like roadblocks on all of the different paths forward. And I know it sounds almost like a cop out to say it, but boy, fixing the 2024 Cubs really does seem like a jigsaw puzzle that's missing a couple of pieces at the Goodwill. Like I don't see the way to do it, guys. And I'm struggling a little bit with it.
And we get a lot of positive news about how, whether it's Brendan Davis doing well or Ed Howard starting to hit, in high A. It's only 22 now, so we'll see how he does in double A. But who's that IFA shortstop they got who they're high on forever? And
Christian Hernandez.
Yeah, who seems to have come back from he was only 12 when they got him, I think. But he seems to have kind of moved it into another gear. A lot of these guys are doing better than and we hear about just other players in the minors who are succeeding, but I feel like it's becoming this broken record of, these guys are doing so well, they're doing so well. And then, remember that Caleb Killian was doing so well. And then, it gets time to come to the show. And then it's like, he was never going to be an actual major league starter. He wasn't going to be a starting position player. He wasn't actually going to be an impact player at all. And I'm like, well, then why the hell are we talking about him so much? That's the thing. And I think that what is becoming readily apparent to your point, James, is that none of these guys are going to bail the Cubs out in 2024.
No.
The Cade Horton injury was particularly rough because he was the one who were like, well, maybe Cade Horton will come up at the All-Star break or in June and take a spot in the rotation and he'll be our Paul Skeens. And that's not happening, right? And
you guys would have thought I think Cade Horton would have been up at this point with the injury after Brown and Wicks both went down. I think Horton would have been up.
I think so.
Yeah, and there you go. Then there's the Ben Brown injury, right? So, they've been unlucky at times too. I think let's not be overly critical on that front, but this is the team they built, and they built a team that was going to play with kind of a narrow path to winning, and they're using up their 9 lives, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. You made some bets on some guys to outperform the contracts you were signing them to, and they didn't. Seiya Suzuki did not become a star. Ian Happ did not become more than average. Nico Horner's below average right now, and those are guys you made some big bets on those guys. And then Dansby Swanson was your big free agent signing, and you took one of your best hitters offensively at catcher and said you don't want him. You're gonna go with Amaya and Gomes and Barnhart and a bunch of guys that aren't Wilson Contreras, and these are bets that have all backfired across the board. So that's tough. There's not a lot of good ways to fix that unless how much.
We're starting to get the picture here a little bit, I think, of the paths forward all being kind of either muddy or no good. I don't know.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what the Cubs do. Decisions will have to be made here after this next stretch against the Giants and the Mets and the Giants heading into the Brewers series because, like we mentioned, it'll determine where they are, how far they might be in a wild card spot if they handle the Giants and Mets well. If they don't, then this will force the hand to figure out so that we at least know what's going on the rest of this season. Because boy, when that calendar turns to July, you wrap up June with the Brewers, then you've got the Phillies, who recently swept those Brewers. So these are two really good teams, and then you play the Orioles and then the Cardinals 4 more times before the All-Star break. You get 3 against Anaheim, but the rest of those games are just brutal. This is a real tough schedule the rest of the way here.
And as we've noted earlier, after that Brewers series, we're running out of Brewers games. There are only 3 left the rest of the season.
And those are what, mid-July, right? Like I think
those are a week before the trading deadline.
Yeah, and that's it. So yeah, division is getting out of hand real fast, and so you look at these wild card spots and all the other bad teams. You've got to start beating the Cardinals and the Giants of the world and the Mets, because we've talked about tiebreakers and how tiebreakers are your head-to-head records in these series, and you've already lost to a bunch of these wild card contenders. You've already lost your series to San Diego. You've already lost your series to Atlanta, right? So there's a lot of folks that are going to have that tiebreaker ahead of you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And we on the stretch last season, we kept talking about how the Cubs literally own tiebreakers over nobody, and so they needed to take care of their own business, and they just didn't do it. The one quibble I will have with what you just said, Jeremy, is that they need to beat the Cardinals and the Giants of the world. Can they beat literally anybody? I don't really care who it is. Just, can you beat somebody?
Well, let's look ahead to the games this week. So the games starting on Monday against San Francisco. We try to pull up pitching matchups.
I saw a bunch of TBDs.
Yeah,
Kyle Hendricks, by the way, pitching on Wednesday. So
I'm digging through these here, but yeah, Kyle Hendricks forced back to the rotation because of the injuries that we described earlier to Ben Brown.
By the way, hands in the air for Kyle Hendricks, who came into that Cardinals game on Friday.
Tremendous performance, yes.
When Wicks, people bag on Hendricks, and obviously he's winding down his career, and they kept him a year longer. They needed to, etc. But boy, he came in no notice, not warming up really, until last second. Came in for Wicks, who I think there's another guy who seems to be perennially hurt now this season, and really pitched well. And kept the Cubs in that game.
He did, yeah.
Until, fourth leading WAR leader, Hayden Wisniewski, came in and gave up a solo shot. But even then.
Which will be the official GIF of the 2024 season is Hayden Wisniewski. Pitching matchups for the Monday, it's Hicks against Assad. And then Tuesday, Webb and Steele. Wednesday, TBD and the aforementioned Kyle Hendricks. And we will be at that game on Wednesday, watching Kyle Hendricks go for the Cubs. We'll be out in the bleachers that game. If you're out there, look for us.
I question the wisdom of our life choices, given it's going to be 93 degrees on Wednesday.
Whew, it's gonna be rough, but it'll be hopefully a Cubs victory here.
There is a chance of thunderstorms, though, so that's good.
Well, as long as those hold off until I'm supposed to be going to the White Sox game later in the evening, the last red line doubleheader of the season on Wednesday.
Yeah, hopefully so. But yeah, no, I loved seeing Hendricks, and we've talked about it before on the podcast about creative things you could do with Hendricks before he was sent to the bullpen. We were talking about having either, Hendricks be an opener piggybacked by somebody where he only goes through the lineup one time, or the inverse where you have an opener and he comes in, but still limiting how many times people get to see him. But while he still has some effective numbers there, and we got to see it a little bit against the Cardinals here.
I think that's a really astute point, Jeremy. And it's something that we talked about quite a bit on different podcasts that I've done as well, where you just have to be, you can't just like throw him into the bullpen and hope that he'll just become Drew Smiley, right? Where he'll be versatile in any sort of fashion that you need him to be. So if that's what the Cubs want to do on Wednesday, if they want to throw him out there for, 3 innings and then give way to somebody else, you do have that off day on Thursday if memory serves. So at least you kind of have that ability to really kind of expend your bullpen, and you've got the day off to kind of get it back. I think that might be ultimately a great day to kind of experiment with that if Craig Counsell wants to get a little bit froggy.
Which has not been the brand of the Cubs this year. They have not been very experimental, or they don't like to get froggy very often, Pat.
I just, we finally saw it in that Tampa Bay series. They bunted 3 straight at bats. So
3 straight bunts, that's right.
And they scored 2 runs, did they not?
So, Pat, with that, let's go with your predictions for the week.
Sure. So
let's stick with the 6-game homestand. Let's not tackle the 4 at the Giants. So just the 6-game homestand.
The Cubs are going up against. First of all, the Cubs have the Cubs pitching is lined up pretty well. Assad pitches twice. You've got Imanaga and Steele, and then Teod and Hendricks. They do have to go up against Webb and Hicks, who are both good starters. So don't sleep on them. And McGill, but Imanaga versus Quintana. I'll be so irritated if the Cubs lose that game. That's the Jose Quintana of Cubs fame with a ERA close to 5 now. I think finally the Cubs are going to right themselves this week. It's always darkest before the dawn, and I think the Cubs are going to go 4-2. But I hope that I'm wrong. I hope they do better.
4-2.
They need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they do. James, are you as optimistic as Pat? 4-2. What's your prediction for the upcoming 6 games?
I made the comment earlier that the Cubs are spinning their tires and can't get out of the mud. I think they go 3-3. I think they win one of the series and annoyingly drop 2 of 3 in the other one. And one final prediction, we will get a Chicago columnist complaining that Ryan Sandberg, the celebration of the Sandberg game on Sunday, is being upstaged by ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, and it's being, denigrated in some way. So those are my predictions: 3-3, and one overwrought column about the Sandberg game anniversary.
I like it. I'm going 3-3 as well. I think they get 1 out of the Giants series, and then they take 2 of 3 from the Mets before heading on the road. So I think 3-3. Pat is the optimistic one this week at 4-2.
God help me if I'm the optimistic one, but I think you are underestimating the Cubs' will to live or will to win, as Hawk says, right? TWTW, right?
That's right.
Will to win.
Can we? So, all right, what do you prefer, TWTW or WINT? Which one do you guys like better? The old Tim Beckman. Whatever is needed today, I think was what the acronym was at Illinois football, the WINT. Which one of those do you prefer?
Well, first of all, Tim Beckman never won a game at Illinois, so I don't think that's really fair. I just remember the Hawk, TWTW, so I'm going with that one.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. The will to win. All right. And before we get to our Cubs 1984 breakdown, I did want to make mention, Pat, I sent you the link today. We have another anniversary. It's June 16th, 2007. On this day in 2007, Derek Lee was hit by a pitch and charged Chris Young of the Padres, and they had the big brawl.
Right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
They had the brawl where Zambrano's pants got busted up, and everyone's brawling all over the place. This was rewatching that clip. I had totally forgotten about that moment until I saw exactly as soon as I saw him get hit. Like, oh, I remember this moment. Wild time.
Which Cub do you think is most likely to charge a mound nowadays, and why is it Christopher Morel?
That's the one who cares. Yeah.
That would be it, yeah. I think Patrick Wisdom might do it. He seems like he is about to get so pissed off at like the baseball gods for keeping his fly balls in the stadium. He may go ape and kill somebody.
Yeah, he was about to lose it again after today, but the Friday would have been a home run except the wind, and then today not quite a home run either. Just tough stretch for him as well.
Do you guys put any stock into the theories about the baseballs being different this year with home runs down as significantly as they are?
Yeah, it would be silly for the league to do that, but it would not shock me at this point.
It's Major League Baseball. I put nothing past them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's not like they don't have a track record of messing with the balls in the past. So they do mess with the balls. So I just don't know what the bringing down the offense.
Yeah, with offense at historically low levels, though, you'd think that would be insanity. But
right,
well,
especially
look at the jerseys the players are wearing. I rest my case.
It's fair.
The see-through jerseys.
Yeah.
The negligees. I would say the Cub most likely to charge the mound might be actually from the dugout. It might be a Tyson Miller because he's the team leader in so many ways.
Yes, he is. That he is.
I literally, I think like Patch just like staple the war leaders behind him during podcasts and just keep referring to it for answers to questions.
Just Pat he's the taps the sign meme now.
TW.
With that, Pat, take us back.
The war to win.
Take us back to 1984. This is a segment we do every single week here, celebrating the 40th anniversary of your 1984 Chicago Cubs. They made the playoffs. We are juxtaposing them with where the Cubs are this season and watching this team in 1984 take off. And last we chatted, it was a pretty ho-hum week.
Yeah.
Did things pick up? Did news and business pick up this week, Pat?
Oh, what a week. Mid-June in 84, right? So on the field, it was an unmitigated disaster. The Cubs started off strong. They took 2 out of 3 from Montreal. And then they finished by getting swept by the Phillies at home. It was a 7-game homestand. And they were up half a game going into the series, or up a game, and they ended up 2 games out of first place by the end of the week. There were some highlights of the week worth noting. One was, of course, June 12th, 1984, when yours truly, here's my ticket stub from the game.
Wow.
Which I kept all those years. Yours truly sat at the Tuesday 120 game in section 206, row 11. Admission was $5.
$5 for the Terrace Reserve there?
Just a fin, yep.
Nice.
And so sat there, got to see a really good game, actually. Cubs had 4 homers. Gary Matthews Sr. hit a home run. Mel Hall hit his last ever home run as a Cub. We'll get to that in a minute. Jody Davis had 2 home runs in the game. Back then, catchers were allowed to hit home runs, which was great. And Jody Davis hit number 9 and 10 in that game. And increased his RBI total to 44. Yeah, the Cubs, you look at the Cubs lineup and you look at the OPSs back then. Dernier 802, Sandberg 839, Matthews 772, Durham 967, Mel Hall 805, Ronce 750, Jody was at 907. You know, all those sort of as good or better than any Cub today. I did go back and look at the box score for that game, and you know, they're playing the Expos, and I've always said, go to Montreal, go to a Expos game there if you ever get a chance. But I looked at the lineup from the Expos that day, and at the time, it didn't really resonate with me as much. But here were the first 6 batters in the lineup for the Expos that day. You ready? Tim Raines, Pete Rose, Andre Dawson, Gary Carter, Tim Wallach, and Terry Francona.
Jesus.
Well, the first 4 are in the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Francona probably will be as a manager, I'm guessing. And
Yep.
Tim Wallach was a damn good third baseman. That was a pretty good lineup, right?
That is nice.
So I got to see 4 Hall of Famers on that team. And, of course, I got to see on the Cubs several Hall of Famers, but I got to see Ryan Sandberg, Hall of Famer, and Dennis Eckersley started the game. So there's another Hall of Famer. So 6 Hall of Famers appeared in that game.
Wow. That's awesome.
Eckersley got the win in 7 innings, pitched well. But the Cubs' troubles continued the rest of the week. Pitching troubles for sure, and they lost 4 straight to the Phillies at home. That was devastating at the time. And the Cubs had this. They called it the June swoon back in those days. But the Cubs had a track record of not doing well in the middle and late June and falling out of contention. So this was a big deal. Russell got bombed. Rainey pitched poorly. It was just one of those deals. But interesting news, the day after I went to the game, probably spurred on from my attendance, the Cubs made a trade. They traded the aforementioned Mel Hall, along with a young player who had come up in '83 for a cup of coffee, as they would say, by the name of Joe Carter, and a few other unknown, not worthy of mentioning players. And the Cubs acquired in that deal a guy by the name of Rick Sutcliffe, who was a starting pitcher for Cleveland at the time, and had the year before won 17 games and been an all-star. The year before that with Cleveland, he led the league in ERA, and 3 years before that, he was the rookie of the year with the Dodgers, who he came up with. So this was like a legit ace pitcher the Cubs acquired to go with an Eckersley, to go with a Trout, to go with a Sanderson, and now all of a sudden the Cubs had themselves a rotation. It was a steep price to give up, but Rick Sutcliffe would go on to finish 16-1 that season. His .941 winning percentage was one of the highest I don't think it's ever been toppled in Major League history since, but quite good. And it was one of what should have been 2 Cy Youngs for him. He got robbed of another one later on, but basically was a catalyst for getting the Cubs into 2.69 ERA too, getting them into the playoffs that year. So it worked out very well for the Cubs at the time. Now, they did give up Joe Carter, who really started to come into his own in 1986. So like 2 years later, and you knew it was coming. He was a good player, and you hate giving him up. That's the way good trades work, right? You give up a young player and you get a cost-controlled veteran who you're going to have for, in fairness, the next 5 years. I mean, Rick Sutcliffe would take the playoffs a couple times, and those are the Hobson's deals you have to make. Joe Carter with Cleveland did quite well. Then he was with San Diego for a year. Then he went to Toronto, where he single-handedly won not one but 2 consecutive World Series titles for Toronto.
Yep.
So
the real story here is that the Cubs made a trade with not Philadelphia.
Yes, yeah. And it was the first. And Rick Sutcliffe had never played for the Phillies. So that was a highly unusual move for them in this era of baseball. But it was certainly a risky move by Dallas Green, but one that I think, those they say, well, both teams, it worked out for both teams. In this case, I think it actually did. The Cubs also got a relief pitcher named George Frazier in the deal, who had some middling success. Well, middling is perhaps a little too effusive, but was a pitcher thereafter. Rick Sutcliffe was basically fomented this rotation and allowed the Cubs to start to move some other guys out of the rotation. And really, the team was starting to coalesce around the team they had. They also, in trading Mel Hall, just like with the Bill Buckner trade for Dennis Eckersley, kind of opened things up so that the players that they had could play more regularly. So Durham was now the permanent first baseman. With Hall traded, that opened up right field for Keith Moreland to play consistently, Sonk, as we call him. And then, you Junior in center and Matthews in left. And so the roster had settled at this point, and that was something that they had needed to do because they had a few too many players in order to get everybody the at-bats they needed and to be effective. So.
And kudos to Dallas Green for doing it early. Like this is mid-June and making a move because he was confident that the way this team was performing, it's something they hadn't seen in decades. So didn't want to waste it.
The only downside, of course, because there's always a downside, is Sutcliffe wasn't able to pitch until the following Tuesday, June 19th. Because they screwed up the paperwork, Dallas Green did, when you made a trade across divisions at this point in the season. You had to file like waiver paperwork for players, and they hadn't done that for Hall and Carter or whatever. So it took they had to wait basically a week to get that the paperwork to follow up. And then when they did, he was able to officially for the Cubs. And there was some I saw some joke on Twitter the other day where Sutcliffe had said that after that Philly series, they were getting bombed, and the pitching coach calls all the pitchers in and he starts yelling at them, and he says, you're terrible, and he looks at Sutcliffe and he's like, you haven't done anything yet. And Sutcliffe's looking at him like, I'm not allowed to pitch. I'm just standing here. And he's supposed to like, well, then do better or something, So that was kind of funny, and do better he did, obviously. Once he finally got the green light from Major League Baseball to actually play for the Cubs. So so exciting times. 2 games out of first place, but with a lot of hope for the future. It'd be interesting if the Cubs could make one of those types of trades, where they trade something that is going to hurt you in the long run. You give up a guy who's going to hit almost 400 home runs in his career and win 2 World Series, but it also provides you a key piece for your next half a decade as well.
Yep.
It's like what they did with Yu Darvish, right? Gave up a potential Cy Young candidate to get. No, that didn't work out the same way.
Hey, you leave Owen Casey alone. I'm tired of this slander. It's because he's Canadian, isn't it? I knew it. You hate hosers. How dare you?
Well, and in the case of Joe Carter, as good a player as he was, and he was, outstanding. The Cubs were able to kind of make up for it by getting another right fielder named Andre Dawson in 1987 too. So it's not as if they necessarily felt that hole. I mean, it'd obviously be great to have Joe Carter, but Andre Dawson more than filled that void for the team.
Oh yeah,
that 5-year period. So I feel like it was a win-win. If you said which would you rather have, Joe Carter and Chuck Rainey, or Rick Sutcliffe and Andre Dawson, well, there you go.
Andre Dawson, my favorite player until from '87 until the emergence of Mark Grace, and then he became my favorite player.
So who is your all-time favorite player, Jeremy?
So I think those 2 guys are my 2 guys. I love.
Those are both worthy choices. What about you, James?
I definitely was a big Mark Grace guy. Like he kind of came into form right as I was like growing up in the 90s.
Yeah,
so,
he didn't wear batting gloves. How cool was that as a kid? It was so cool.
For whatever reason, like the casual like sidearm burst after he retired somebody at first, that always has stuck with me. It's just like effortlessly cool. And like you said, batting without batting gloves, like there was a lot of badassery going on with Mark Grace. Cool. I definitely gravitated towards him as a young Cubs fan.
20 years from now, I'll swear that I saw Mark Grace smoke a cigarette rounding first, going to third on a base hit. Now, I know that isn't the case in real life, but that's what I'm going to tell people.
I do frankly think baseball needs more heaters in the dugout. Like, I don't understand, why don't we see guys with vape pens in the dugout? I don't understand.
When Dave Smith was a closer, he did it in the bullpen, which was open air at the time, right from the stands. But
it was open air being like in foul territory.
Yeah, right. So those are both good answers. I think Grace and Dawson are both fine answers. They're both wrong. The correct answer is Bill Buckner. But,
of course, yeah.
But those are certainly, at least for the last 50 years, those are top 5 answers.
I'm a slightly younger vintage than you guys, and so Bill Buckner was like when I was like real small. Just to kind of reflect how like my age, basically, Dwight Gooden threw a 5-pitch shutout on the day that I was born in 1985. So, and against the Cubs, mind you. So that got me off to a rolling good start.
One could argue that 4 of the top 5, if not 4 of the top 10 for sure, Cubs of the last 40 years, 45 years, would be first baseman.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of fandom, right? So you've got, let's say, if you start with Buckner, you throw in Grace. I think you throw in Derek Lee.
Oh
Dude,
yeah,
I love.
And you throw in
Derek
Anthony
Lee.
Rizzo, and boom.
And Rizzo,
That's
of course. Yeah.
yeah.
But the Chicago is sort of like the Bears are a team meant for running backs. Cale Sayers, Walter Payton, Neil Anderson. I think the Cubs are built for first baseman, which is why the Schwindel / whatever last year was era has been kind of doubly rough on us because we expect more of first base. That's supposed to be a position of strength for us.
Your Trey Mancini's of the world, your Eric Hosmers of the
Matt
world.
Fergus's.
Yeah. And don't forget the White Sox also had Frank Thomas, Paul Konerko, and Jose Abreu. So they too have enjoyed the first baseman.
And Jim Thome, if you count him as a first baseman.
Kind of.
Yeah. I'll count him for whatever he wants. He's a Peoria boy. He can pick.
And with that, we are going to wrap it up this week. Always a fun time, even when we have to talk about the Cubs when they are down. We will still have a good time getting
corner. This is the low point, Jeremy.
This is it. We've done it. We've gotten past
Today is the low point. You watch, mark my words, it's going to go up from here.
Jeremy's going to catch a walk-off home run in the bleachers on Wednesday, and it will turn the Cubs season around. It will be the equivalent of Aramis Ramirez's game-winning shot in 2007.
You're the Ferris Bueller of our generation.
I'm ready. I'm ready to do my part. I just need the Cubs to get it into the bleachers.
The anniversary of the Ferris Bueller game. I'm sure the Cubs will be doing something for that.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm turning 40 next year. Please do.
All right. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. James, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
I was going to say you can find me often raving on a street corner in Chicago. I usually carry a cardboard sign. But outside of that, you can find me on NBC Chicago and NBC Sports Chicago. You can follow me on Big Ten Country. I co-host the Cubs Talk podcast with Layla Rahimi and a rotating cast of characters and misfits. And follow me on Twitter X, at James Neveau.
And you can follow us on X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, all the same places at Wrigleyville Nat. And of course, we mentioned Pat was showing his ticket stub. If you want to see that, if you're listening on the audio version, you're like, well, who's he showing it to? He's showing it to the people over at the YouTube channel. Yeah. Make sure he's doing it again.
There you
go ahead.
Here's the
twofer.
Yeah.
That's a beauty.
Ticketmaster, even then.
So head on over to go to youtube.com, search Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. Give us a subscribe, like, follow. That helps us work the algorithm so that other Cub fans can find the show. And if you want to stick with the audio-only format, of course you're encouraged to do that, but make sure you're telling your other Cub fan friends about the show. Show them how to subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to support the show financially, the way we keep this show ad-free every single season is because of all the wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. Every little bit helps and keeps us able to pay for our domain names, our hosting fees, etc. And so every single penny goes back into the show, and we won't run ads. So please keep that train going. Keep the lights on for us. We really appreciate all of the support we get from our patrons. And with that, we are going to wrap it up for the week. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.